It's just another day in America. The sun is shining. The sky is beautiful. The capitalist imperialist war machine is destroying civilization after civilization and murdering everyone in its path. It's just the definition of a perfect day. Hey y'all, it's Alice, and unless you've been living under a rock since the day you were born, it really shouldn't come as any surprise nowadays that conservatives and evangelicals alike both seem to be hell-bent on making life for the trans community as difficult as possible. And for what reason? I mean, it's to take away our rights. It's to oppress us at all cost, to essentially make human beings who they don't understand disappear from sight because they don't actually want to understand us. To them, making us disappear from the world will please their great sky wizard, even though they've never spoken to this sky wizard and it's never spoken to them. And also their holy book doesn't really have a lot to say about trans people. It's interesting, huh? All they know is trans people are icky, and they have this Stone Age understanding of, well, God made Adam and Eve, man and woman. And boy howdy, that's enough for them. Science? Pfft, more like a liberal conspiracy to take God out of the country. It's insanity, because it seems like they're hell-bent on making us the undesirables of society. I can't wrap my head around how anyone could willingly do so much harm to someone they've never met and feel justified in it. And whenever someone like myself speaks out, they claim that I'm complaining or whining or I should be happy with what I have when, hello, has anyone actually taken a look at the privileges trans people have compared to the white, cis, hetero people who make up the majority of this country? You wonder why we're so loud. Our very well-being and place in society are in jeopardy because of the discriminatory legislation they are trying to push through every single day of our lives. So to quote an article written by Alex Bolliger from LGBTQ Nation, many of the bills are intended to stop gender-affirming healthcare for minors. Bills have been introduced in Arkansas, Florida, Illinois, Missouri, New Hampshire, South Carolina, South Dakota, Tennessee, and Texas that would restrict young trans people's access to health care. Some of the bills, like Florida's and South Dakota's, would make it a felony to provide puberty blockers to minors, even though puberty usually occurs when a person is under the age of 18. So, this shouldn't have to be said with all of the research that is readily available nowadays, but may as well go ahead and say it one more time, right? Puberty blockers are not chemical castration. It is not abuse if a doctor administers them to a teenager. In order for a teenager to receive puberty blockers, they have to meet with a physician multiple times who will assess over time if the teen is actually suffering from gender dysphoria. And if it's determined they are indeed suffering from dysphoria, they will be administered hormone replacement therapy. Now, say that they don't actually have dysphoria. What puberty blockers do is they delay the onset of natural puberty. And if the child turns out to not be trans, as soon as they're taken off the blockers, puberty kicks in like normal and there are no negative side effects. And it's wild to me hearing conservative figures come out and say, they're trying to give gender-affirming surgeries to children. They're giving children chemicals. Just, have you done the least amount of research on this? Seriously? Wait. They don't care about facts. Facts don't matter. Facts don't care about your feelings. It's almost like they assume that puberty blockers are being handed out like free things at an Oprah show of, you get puberty blockers, you get puberty blockers, everyone's getting their puberty blocked. That's not how any of this works. But alas, there's more. Hooray. State Representative Brad Daw will soon introduce similar legislation in Utah, and he said that the purpose of his bill is to prevent transgender minors from changing their lives permanently. So what's so insidious about this is that oftentimes conservatives and evangelicals will cloak their transphobia with a false sense of safety or concerns of safety for children. You're changing their lives and bodies permanently. They'll never be able to go back. That's the point, Brad. Hormone therapy has been proven over and over again to not only alleviate dysphoria, but is literally the only known cure for it. What you're saying is you essentially don't care what these children are struggling with. You're saying that you don't care about if they're being bullied. You don't care that they feel out of place. You don't care that they're suffering untold amount of mental illness. You don't care if they're suicidal. You're basically saying that you could care less if they end up killing themselves. Like, whenever you look at the suicide rates among teens in the trans community, they are horrifically high. And why do you think that's happening? And the article continues. Other states, including Alabama, Georgia, Indiana, Missouri, New Hampshire, Tennessee, West Virginia, and Washington, are attacking transgender students' ability to compete in sports, requiring them, or just trans girls like in Washington's bill, to compete with the gender indicated on their birth certificates or with their sex assigned at birth. Georgia Representative Philip Singleton introduced the Student Athlete Protection Act, which would ban biological males from participating in individual girls' sports and biological females from participating in individual boys' sports. The text of the bill does not define what a biological male or female is because, of course it doesn't. The actual discussion over trans people in sport is a big topic for a completely different time, but I feel like it's beyond disgusting to use the term biological sex like they did here, which really doesn't mean anything in the grand scheme of things, as a way to ensure that these students don't feel safe, they don't feel accepted, they don't feel like they can be around others like themselves. It's essentially a way to ostracize them and say, well, the circumstances of your birth are going to determine the rest of your life, and it doesn't matter if you know for yourself that your identity is different than what you were assigned at birth. We're still going to force you to be that regardless of the harm that it brings upon you. And it's ironic hearing this come from people who claim to be in the party of family values. I just think, okay, family values, really? Can you actually define that for me? Because when you say that to me and I look at your actions, the kind of things you're trying to pass through, the kind of things you claim to stand for, the only kind of family I imagine you valuing is like the nuclear family from the 40s and 50s, where the man is the breadwinner, the mom stays at home and cooks, the kids are cis and straight and Christian, everyone worships God, and then on the side they look down at all the queer, brown, and black people who don't have it as good as they do. Hetero/cis normativity was just how things were. But here's the thing. Society was different back then. We know now what we didn't know back then. That's just how human society progresses. We learn more about ourselves as time goes on. Science advances, psychology advances, and we learn more about gender, about sex. You either move with the wheel of progress or you get crushed by it. Your choice. Singleton continues. The intent of my bill is to make sure that every student has the opportunity to compete fairly. We're seeing a lot of things happening in states across the country, and a big part of my campaign promise was to preserve the character of my community. God, the character of my community. That's just disgusting. Honestly, you want to preserve transphobia in a culture that did everything it could to prevent us from existing? That's what you want, really. I mean, it's no surprise to me at this point, but it's still surreal to hear them just saying things like this out loud and essentially turning their dog whistle into a bullhorn. Further into the article, it states, Republicans in several states are focusing on bathrooms and other gender-segregated facilities. A bill in Kentucky would ban transgender people from using the appropriate facilities in schools. One in Massachusetts would only allow people to access bathrooms in similar facilities associated with an individual's anatomical sex. So are we going to institute mandatory genital checks for everyone wanting to use a public bathroom? Do you really want to go down that road? And then next, it gets worse. Tennessee and Washington Republicans introduced bills that could make it indecent exposure for a transgender person to use the bathroom or other facilities associated with their gender identity or their sex assigned at birth. So we're just trying to use the bathroom. We're literally minding our own business. You're just calling it indecent exposure because that's what you think it should be called when you have to acknowledge the existence of a trans person, right? And making it a felony for a trans person to show their face in a public space opens them up to untold amounts of abuse and assault, things that we are already struggling with. And lastly, the article says, Arizona Representative John Fillmore introduced a bill that would ban school officials and teachers from using the correct pronouns for transgender students, essentially pretending that who they are isn't real. And a bill in Pennsylvania would restrict prisoners' access to gender-affirming health care. And it's essentially an attack on all sides. What they want to do is isolate us, delegitimize us, attack us, and oppress us. Like strip all of our systems of support away. And it's systematic erasure of a minority that needs to be treated as the very dire threat that it is. They literally want to see my community disappear, and they're becoming louder and bolder and more violent about it. Now, having said all that, it's not really possible to have any easy solutions to fix this because this is something that is deeply systemic. This is something that's been happening for decades and decades and decades, and these ideas are deeply rooted within the systems of government, within our culture itself. That's not something where you can just snap your fingers and fix it. Like, as much as we wish we could, that's just not how reality works nowadays. But you can always start somewhere because every little action will always lead to something else so long as you take that first step. Now, you're probably asking, well, what can I do? You can do things like protest en masse. You can donate to organizations like the ACLU, the Transgender Law Center, Lambda Legal, and so on and so forth. And you can educate yourself on the issues that we're facing. If you have some platform you can use to get your voice out to more people, use that. Find any way to build a community of people like yourself. Find other trans people in your area. Find allies. Build that community and work together to steadily elevate your voice to a national level. And I know it's going to be a long, arduous road. It's not an easy fight, but the LGBTQ community as a whole has been through this. We saw this during Stonewall. We've seen this over the past 20, 30 years. We're going to make it, but it's gonna be hard, you know? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna leave a link in the description for the article that most of this was pulled from so you can read it for yourself. I'm also gonna leave links to organizations that you can donate directly to who are all currently fighting for trans rights. I'm also gonna leave a link for an organization called Freedom for All Americans that has a page dedicated to tracking anti-trans legislation at the state level, so you can actually see for yourself if the state you're in could potentially be passing laws that'll make life more difficult for you. That way you can stay informed, you can let others know, and essentially do everything you can where you are to be aware at all times. So if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like below. If you want to see more, hit the subscribe button and be sure to ring the bell so you'll be notified whenever I drop videos in the future. Until then, stay strong, keep going. I love you.